Tommy had always been the guy everyone crossed the street to avoid. At 28 years old, he stood tall and broad, with hands that looked like they could crush a brick. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of East London, he learned early that being tough meant survival. But somewhere along the way, being tough turned into being a bully. This Saturday afternoon was supposed to be just another weekend with his mates. They had spent the last 3 hours at the Crown Pub, a small, dingy place where the beer was cheap and the conversations were loud. Tommy was on his fifth pint when his friend Danny suggested they take a walk through central London. "Come on, then let's see what's happening in the fancy part of town." Danny laughed, stumbling slightly as he stood up from their corner table. Tommy liked the idea. He always enjoyed walking through the tourist areas. There was something about seeing all those visitors with their cameras and guidebooks that made him feel superior. They looked so clean, so proper, so easy to mess with if he felt like it. The group of 4 friends made their way through the busy London streets. The alcohol had made Tommy feel even more confident than usual. He walked with a swagger, bumping into people on purpose and enjoying the way they quickly apologized and moved out of his way. "Look at all these tourists," he said to his friends, pointing at a group of Japanese visitors taking photos. Acting like they own the place. As they got closer to Buckingham Palace, the crowds became thicker. Families with children, elderly, couples, and groups of young people from all over the world filled the streets. Everyone seemed excited to be there, phones and cameras out, trying to capture the perfect shot of the famous royal residence. That's when Tommy saw him, standing perfectly still near the palace gates was one of the Queen's guards. The man wore the traditional bright red uniform with its gold buttons gleaming in the afternoon sun. On his head sat the tall, black fur hat that made him look even taller than he already was. In his hands he held a rifle, though Tommy knew it was just for show. The guard stood like a statue. His eyes stared straight ahead, not moving even when tourists walked right up to him and posed for pictures. Children pointed at him and giggled, but he didn't react. Parents told their kids to be respectful, but some still tried to make him laugh or smile. Tommy watched this scene with growing interest. Here was a man who couldn't fight back, couldn't move, couldn't even speak. He was like a living toy soldier, there for everyone's entertainment. "Look at this guy," Tommy said to his friends, nodding toward the guard. "Standing there like a robot. Bet he's dying to move but can't." His friends looked over and chuckled. They knew that look in Tommy's eyes. It was the same look he got before he started trouble at the pub, or when he decided to pick on someone smaller than him. "Come on, Tom," said his friend Pete, though he was smiling as he said it. "Leave the poor guy alone. He's just doing his job." But Tommy was already walking toward the guard. The alcohol in his system had washed away any sense of respect or common decency he might have had. All he could see was an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back. The guard was younger than Tommy had expected, probably in his early 30s. He had a strong jaw and clear skin, the kind of face that belonged in a movie about soldiers. But what struck Tommy most was how completely still he was. Not even his eyes moved as tourists walked around him. "Impressive, isn't it?" said an elderly woman standing nearby with her husband. She had an American accent and was taking photos of the guard from different angles. "The discipline it must take to stand so still." Tommy overheard this and felt a surge of irritation. Discipline? This guy was just standing around in a costume, pretending to be important. Real toughness meant being able to handle yourself in a fight, not playing dress-up for tourists. He started circling the guard slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. Other tourists noticed and began to feel uncomfortable. Some moved away, sensing that something unpleasant was about to happen. The guard remained completely motionless. His breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved. His eyes stayed fixed on a point in the distance, as if Tommy didn't exist at all. This lack of acknowledgement only made Tommy angrier. He was used to people reacting to him, whether with fear, respect, or anger. But this man was treating him like he was invisible, and that was something Tommy couldn't stand. "Must be nice," Tommy said loudly, positioning himself directly in front of the guard. "Getting paid to play dress-up. Bet you feel real important in that fancy costume. Still no reaction. The guard's face might as well have been carved from stone. Tommy's friends had caught up and were standing a few meters away, watching with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had seen Tommy pick fights before, but never with someone who couldn't fight back. It felt different, somehow less fair, even to them. Danny pulled out his phone and started recording. "This should be good," he whispered to Pete. More tourists were starting to notice the situation. A few people were filming, thinking it might be some kind of show or performance. Others looked worried and began moving their children away from the area. Tommy stepped closer to the guard, so close that he could see the individual threads in the red fabric of his uniform. He could smell the polish on the man's boots and the starch in his collar. Everything about the guard was perfect, pristine, professional. It made Tommy feel dirty and rough by comparison, which only added fuel to his anger. "What's the matter?" Tommy taunted, his voice getting louder. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you too important to talk to regular people?" The guard's lips didn't even twitch. His training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. Drunk tourists, disrespectful visitors, people trying to get a reaction. The key was to remain completely professional, no matter what happened, but Tommy didn't know about the guard's training. He didn't know about the months of preparation that went into becoming one of the Queen's guards. He didn't know about the physical and mental discipline required or the pride these soldiers took in their duty. All Tommy saw was someone he thought he could push around. The crowd around them was growing. Word was spreading that something was happening near the palace. People were pulling out their phones, some recording the scene, others texting their friends to come and see. Tommy looked around at all the attention he was getting and felt a familiar rush of power. This was his stage now, and the guard was his unwilling co-star in whatever performance he decided to put on. He cracked his knuckles and smiled, the same smile he wore before every fight he'd ever started. In his mind, this was already over. The guard couldn't fight back, couldn't even move. It would be like punching a mannequin. What Tommy didn't realize was that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Tommy started small, the way bullies always do. He began by making faces at the guard, pulling silly expressions just inches from the man's face. He stuck out his tongue, crossed his eyes, and made exaggerated grimaces, trying to get any kind of reaction. The guard remained completely still, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if Tommy wasn't even there. This only made Tommy more determined. "Oh, so you're too good to even look at me?" Tommy said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Several tourists turned to watch, some looking uncomfortable, others seeming entertained by what they thought might be street theater. Tommy's friends were recording everything on their phones, laughing and encouraging him. "Go on, Tom," Danny called out. "See if you can make him blink." Emboldened by his audience, Tommy stepped even closer. He started waving his hands in front of the guard's face, trying to block his view. When that didn't work, he began making loud noises, clapping his hands right next to the guard's ear. "Hello? Anyone home in there?" Tommy shouted. "Or did they replace your brain with stuffing when they put you in that costume?" An older gentleman in the crowd stepped forward, looking concerned. "I say, young man, perhaps you should leave the guard alone. He's performing an important duty." Tommy spun around to face the man, his eyes flashing with anger. "Mind your own business, Grandpa. Nobody asked you." The older man backed away quickly, not wanting any trouble. His wife took his arm and pulled him further into the crowd. This small victory made Tommy feel even more powerful. He turned back to the guard with renewed confidence. "See that?" he said to the motionless soldier. "That's what happens when people disrespect me. But you can't do anything about it, can you? You have to just stand there and take whatever I give you." Tommy began to circle the guard like a shark, looking for weaknesses. For any sign that his harassment was getting through, he noticed how perfectly the guard's uniform was pressed, how shiny his boots were, how precisely his rifle was positioned. "Look at you," Tommy sneered, "all dressed up like a toy soldier. Bet you spent hours getting ready this morning, polishing those boots, making sure every button was perfect. What a waste of time." He reached out and flicked one of the brass buttons on the guard's uniform. Still no reaction. Growing bolder, Tommy started poking the guard's chest with his finger. First just once, then repeatedly, each poke harder than the last. "What's under all this fancy dress?" Tommy asked mockingly. "Are you even a real soldier, or just some actor they hired to stand around and look pretty for the tourists?" The crowd was getting larger now. Word had spread that something was happening near the palace, and people were gathering to watch. Most looked uncomfortable with what they were seeing, but no one seemed willing to intervene. Tommy loved having an audience. It reminded him of his school days when he would pick on smaller kids while everyone else watched. The fear in their eyes, the way they would back down, the power he felt, it was intoxicating. He started getting more creative with his harassment. He pretended to dust off the guard's uniform, making exaggerated cleaning motions while talking to him like he was a child. "There we go, all clean now," Tommy said in a baby voice. "Can't have the pretty soldier looking messy, can we?" When that didn't get a response, he tried a different approach. He stood directly in front of the guard and began doing jumping jacks, trying to distract him. "Come on, join in," Tommy called out. "A little exercise would do you good. Standing around all day can't be healthy." A family with young children was watching from nearby. The mother looked horrified and was trying to shield her kids from the scene, but her husband seemed fascinated by the spectacle. "Daddy, why is that man being mean to the soldier?" the little girl asked. "I don't know, sweetie," her father replied, pulling out his phone to record. "Some people just don't have any respect." Tommy overheard this, and it gave him an idea. He turned to address the crowd directly. "Respect?" he called out loudly. "What's to respect? This guy gets paid to stand around in a costume. I work construction, real work with my hands. Who deserves more respect?" Several people in the crowd murmured their disapproval, but still no one stepped forward to stop him. Feeling invincible, Tommy decided to escalate things further. He reached up toward the guard's famous bearskin hat, the tall black fur cap that was as much a symbol of royal tradition as the crown jewels themselves. "Let's see what you look like without your fancy hat," Tommy said, stretching up to try to knock it off. This was going too far. And even some of Tommy's friends began to look nervous. The bearskin hat wasn't just part of a costume. It was a symbol of centuries of military tradition, worn by soldiers who had served their country with honor. But Tommy didn't care about tradition or honor. All he cared about was the rush he got from humiliating someone who couldn't fight back. He jumped up, trying to swipe the hat from the guard's head. His first attempt missed, but it got closer than anyone had expected. The guard, still maintaining perfect discipline, didn't even flinch. "Almost got it," Tommy laughed, preparing for another attempt. "Come on, let's see that bald head underneath." An American tourist in the crowd was recording everything on his tablet. "This is unbelievable," he said to his wife. "Someone should stop this guy." "Maybe we should call security," she replied, looking around nervously. But Tommy was just getting started. The alcohol in his system had washed away any inhibitions he might have had. The crowd's attention fed his ego, and the guard's complete lack of response made him feel powerful and in control. He began pushing against the guard's shoulder, trying to make him move from his position. The first push was light, almost playful. When the guard remained rock steady, Tommy pushed harder. "What are you made of, concrete?" Tommy laughed. "Come on, move a little. Show everyone you're human." The guard's training was absolute. Years of preparation had taught him to remain motionless, no matter what happened. Drunk tourists crying, children, bad weather, hostile crowds. He had been trained to handle it all, without breaking character. But Tommy misinterpreted this discipline as weakness. In his mind, anyone who wouldn't fight back was a coward. He had spent his whole life believing that might made right, that the strongest person always won. "I bet you're scared," Tommy taunted, pushing harder against the guard's chest. "Bet you're terrified inside, but too chicken to do anything about it." The crowd was getting restless. Some people were calling for security, others were filming everything for social media. A few tourists had started to leave, disgusted by what they were witnessing, but Tommy was in his element now. This was what he lived for, the moment when he had complete power over someone else. When he could do whatever he wanted without consequences, he had no idea that he was about to learn a very different lesson about power, consequences, and what it really meant to mess with the wrong person. Tommy was riding high on adrenaline and alcohol. The crowd had grown to about 50 people, all watching his performance with a mixture of fascination and horror. Phones were recording from every angle, capturing his every move and word. "Look, at all these people watching," Tommy announced loudly, gesturing to the crowd. "They came here to see a real man in action, not some statue pretending to be a soldier." He turned back to the guard, who continued to stand perfectly still. The lack of any reaction was driving Tommy crazy. In his experience, everyone broke. Eventually, everyone had a breaking point where they would either fight back or run away scared. "What's wrong with you?" Tommy demanded, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "Are you even alive in there, or did they stuff you and put you on display like some museum piece?" A teenage girl in the crowd was filming everything on her phone. "This is so messed up," she whispered to her friend. "Someone should totally stop." "This guy, yeah, but look how big he is," her friend replied. "Would you want to get in his way?" Tommy heard their whispered conversation, and it fed his ego even more. He loved being feared, loved knowing that people were too scared to stand. Up to him, he began shoving the guard harder now, using both hands to push against his chest. The first few shoves barely moved the soldier, who seemed to be rooted to the spot like a tree. "Come on," Tommy grunted, putting more force behind each push. "I know you can feel this. Stop pretending and fight back like a man." Still nothing. The guard's face remained completely neutral, his eyes staring straight ahead as if Tommy was invisible. This complete lack of acknowledgement was something Tommy had never experienced before. In every fight he'd ever been in every confrontation, his opponent had at least shown fear or anger. But this man was treating him like he didn't exist, and it was the most infuriating thing Tommy had ever experienced. "Fine," Tommy said, stepping back and cracking his knuckles. "If you want to play statues, let's see how well you can play when things get interesting." He started circling the guard again, but this time there was something different in his movements. Where before he had been playful and mocking, now there was real menace in his approach. Tommy's friends were starting to look nervous. Danny lowered his phone slightly and called out, "Maybe that's enough, mate. You've had your fun?" But Tommy was beyond listening to anyone now. The combination of alcohol, crowd attention, and pure frustration had pushed him past the point of reason. "Oh no," he called back to Danny without taking his eyes off the guard. "We're just getting started. This toy soldier needs to learn some respect." An elderly woman in the crowd spoke up. "Young man, please stop this. You're being very disrespectful." Tommy spun around to face her, his eyes blazing with anger. "Disrespectful? Lady, I'm showing more life than this guy has shown all day. At least I'm real." The woman's husband pulled her back into the crowd. Not wanting to escalate the situation further, Tommy turned back to the guard and began a new level of harassment. He started flicking the guard's ears, pulling at his uniform, and even tried to get his finger into the guard's mouth to make him react. "Come on, toy soldier," Tommy taunted. "Give me something. Blink, twitch, anything to show you're human and not just some fancy mannequin." The guard's discipline was incredible. Despite everything Tommy was doing, he remained completely motionless. His breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved. His eyes never wavered from their fixed point in the distance. This level of self-control should have been impressive, even to someone like Tommy, but in his alcohol-fueled state, he saw it as a challenge that needed to be overcome. "I bet you think you're better than me," Tommy said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Standing there in your fancy uniform, looking down on regular working people. Well, let me tell you something, soldier boy, you're not better than anyone." He began poking the guard's face now, jabbing his finger toward the man's eyes and nose. The guard's eyelids didn't even flutter. The crowd was getting increasingly uncomfortable. Several people had called security, and others were actively looking for police officers. But the palace guards and police who normally patrolled the area seemed to be elsewhere at the moment. "This is insane," muttered an Australian tourist who was recording everything. "How is this guy getting away with this?" Tommy heard him and laughed. "Getting away with what?" "Having a conversation with a statue? There's no law against that, mate." But Tommy was about to cross a line that would change everything. He stepped back and looked at the guard with pure contempt. Everything about the man irritated him. His perfect posture, his pristine uniform, his complete lack of fear or respect for Tommy's reputation. "You know what your problem is?" Tommy said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was somehow more frightening than his earlier shouting. "You think that uniform makes you special? You think standing there like a robot makes you some kind of hero?" He moved closer, so close that his face was inches from the guards. "But I know what you really are," Tommy continued. "You're nothing but a dressed-up security guard, playing pretend for tourists. And deep down, you know it too?" The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Tommy was attacking not just the guard personally, but everything he stood for, his service, his duty, his honor. But still, the guard remained perfectly still. Tommy's frustration reached a boiling point. He had tried everything: mockery, harassment, physical intimidation, personal insults, and nothing had worked. The guard was like a wall that refused to crack no matter how hard Tommy hit it. "That's it," Tommy said, stepping back and raising his fists. "If you won't react to anything else, let's see how you handle this." The crowd sensed the shift in mood immediately. People began backing away, some running to find security or police. Others continued filming. Sensing that something significant was about to happen, Tommy's friends realized that their joke had gone too far. "Tom, don't," Pete called out urgently. "It's not worth it, mate." But Tommy was beyond reason now. The alcohol, the crowd, the guard's complete indifference to his presence, it had all combined to create a perfect storm of rage and stupidity. He drew back his right fist, the same fist that had won him dozens of fights in pubs and on street corners, the same fist that had made him the most feared man in his neighborhood. "Let's see how tough you are now, soldier boy," Tommy snarled. What Tommy didn't know was that he was about to hit someone who had been trained to handle much worse than a drunk bully. Someone who had served his country in some of the most dangerous places on earth. Someone who had been waiting patiently for Tommy to cross the line from harassment into assault. The guard remained perfectly still, but inside his training was already kicking in. Years of military discipline had taught him exactly when and how to respond to a genuine threat. And Tommy, in his ignorance and arrogance, was about to give him that threat. The guard's name was Private Ryan Clark, though nobody in the crowd knew this. What they also didn't know was that beneath the ceremonial red uniform and polished brass buttons stood a man who had served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan with the British Army's elite parachute regiment. Ryan had seen real combat. He had faced down armed insurgents in the mountains of Helmand Province. He had survived roadside bombs, sniper attacks, and close-quarters combat that would have broken lesser men. The drunk bully standing in front of him was nothing compared to what he had already endured, but Ryan's training went far beyond just combat experience. As one of the Queen's Guards, he had spent months learning the discipline required for ceremonial duties. Hours upon hours of standing perfectly still, no matter what happened around him. Rain, snow, screaming children, rude tourists, he had been trained to handle it all without breaking character. The key to this training was knowing exactly when ceremonial duty ended and self-defense began. And Tommy, in his drunken stupidity, was about to cross that line. As Tommy drew back his fist, Ryan's mind automatically shifted into combat mode. His years of military training kicked in like a switch being flipped. The ceremonial guard disappeared, and in his place stood a soldier who had been trained to neutralize threats quickly and efficiently. Ryan could see everything in slow motion now. Tommy's clumsy stance, his telegraphed punch, the way his weight was distributed all wrong. This wasn't a trained fighter. This was just a bully who had probably never faced anyone who could actually fight back. Tommy's fist came forward in a wild haymaker, the kind of punch that worked in bar fights against equally drunk opponents. But Ryan had been trained by the best combat instructors in the British Army. He had sparred with Special Forces soldiers and learned hand-to-hand combat from men who had perfected it in real war zones, the moment Tommy's fist began its journey toward Ryan's jaw, several things happened at once. First, Ryan stepped back exactly 18 inches, not enough to be obvious to the crowd, but enough to make Tommy's punch fall short of its target. Years of boxing training had taught him precisely how to measure distance and timing. Second, Ryan's right hand came up in a perfect defensive position, ready to deflect any follow-up attacks. His left hand remained at his side, but every muscle in his body was now coiled and ready for action. Third, Ryan's mind began calculating his response. His training had taught him to use only the minimum force necessary to neutralize a threat. But it had also taught him that sometimes the best way to stop a bully was to stop them decisively. Tommy's wild punch missed its target completely, but his momentum carried him forward. He stumbled slightly, off balance and confused about why his surefire knockout blow had hit nothing but air. "What the—" Tommy started to say, but he never got to finish the sentence. Ryan's counterattack was a thing of beauty. It came from years of training, muscle memory developed through countless hours of practice. His right hand moved in a perfect straight line, traveling the shortest distance between 2 points with maximum efficiency. The punch was textbook perfect. Ryan's feet were planted properly, his shoulder and hip rotation added power, and his fist was positioned exactly right for maximum impact. It was the kind of punch that combat instructors used as an example of how to do everything correctly, but what made it truly devastating was the precision. Ryan wasn't aiming to just hit Tommy, he was aiming for a specific spot on Tommy's jaw, the point where maximum damage could be done with minimum effort. In the split second before impact, Ryan could see the shock in Tommy's eyes. The bully had finally realized that he had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't some helpless victim. This was a trained soldier who knew exactly how to handle violent situations. The punch connected with a sound that everyone in the crowd would remember for the rest of their lives. It wasn't the dull thud of a typical bar fight punch. It was the sharp, precise crack of perfectly applied force meeting bone. Tommy's head snapped back like he had been hit with a baseball bat. His eyes rolled back, and for a moment he looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The confident sneer disappeared from his face. Replaced by a look of pure shock and pain, Ryan immediately returned to his ceremonial position as if nothing had happened. His face returned to its stoic expression, his eyes focused once again on that distant point on the horizon. To anyone who hadn't been watching carefully, it might have looked like Tommy had simply fallen down on his own, but the crowd had seen everything. Phones had captured every second of the encounter, from Tommy's wild swing to Ryan's perfectly executed counterpunch. The footage would be analyzed and replayed millions of times, becoming a textbook example of what happened when amateur bullies picked fights with professional soldiers. Ryan's training had taught him that the best fights were the ones that ended quickly. His instructors had drilled into him that in real combat, you didn't want to dance around trading punches like in a movie. You wanted to end the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible. Mission accomplished. Tommy was still standing, but barely. He swayed on his feet like a tree in a strong wind, his hands clutching at his jaw. Blood was already beginning to flow from his mouth, and when he opened it to try to speak, everyone could see that his front teeth were no longer where they were supposed to be. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Many of them were still recording, but nobody seemed to know what to say. They had just witnessed something that would become legendary. The moment when a bully picked on the wrong person and learned a lesson he would never forget. Ryan remained perfectly still, back in his ceremonial role as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. His breathing was completely controlled, his heart rate barely elevated. This had been just another day at the office for him, but for Tommy, this was the beginning of the worst day of his life. Time seemed to freeze for everyone watching. Tommy stood there swaying, his hand slowly rising to touch his jaw as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The confident smirk that had been on his face just seconds before was completely gone, replaced by a look of pure shock and confusion. Blood began to trickle from the corner of his mouth, dark red against his pale skin. When he opened his mouth to try to speak, everyone could see the damage. His front teeth were either completely gone or hanging by threads, creating dark gaps where his smile used to be. Tommy tried to say, but the words came out slurred and wet. Speaking was suddenly incredibly difficult when half your teeth were missing. The crowd remained silent, everyone still processing what they had just witnessed. The transformation had been so sudden, so complete, that it was hard to believe it had really happened. One moment Tommy had been the aggressor, full of confidence and swagger. The next moment he was a broken, bleeding mess. Ryan, meanwhile, had returned to his ceremonial position as if absolutely nothing had happened. His face was once again perfectly neutral, his eyes focused on that distant point. His breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved. To anyone who hadn't seen the actual punch, it might have looked like Tommy had simply had some kind of accident, but everyone had seen it. And everyone was recording it. Tommy took a stumbling step backward, his legs suddenly feeling weak and unsteady. The world seemed to be spinning around him, and he couldn't understand why. He had thrown punches before, dozens of them. He had been in countless fights, but nothing like this had ever happened to him. My teeth ... he mumbled, his tongue probing the empty spaces in his mouth. When he pulled his hand away from his face, it was covered in blood. That's when he saw them. 3 of his front teeth were scattered on the cobblestones near his feet, looking like small white pebbles against the gray stone. One was completely intact, another was broken in half, and the third was just a fragment of what it used to be. The sight of his own teeth lying on the ground hit Tommy harder than the punch itself. This was real. This had actually happened. The pain in his jaw, the taste of blood in his mouth, the shocked stares of the crowd, it was all real. "Oh my God," whispered a woman in the crowd. "Did you see that? Did everyone see that?" "I got it all on video," said the Australian tourist, his hands shaking slightly as he held his phone. "The whole thing, from start to finish." Tommy's friends stood frozen, not knowing what to do. They had expected to watch Tommy humiliate some helpless guard, maybe get a few laughs and some social media content. They had never imagined it would end like this. Danny was the first to move, rushing forward to help his friend. Tommy, mate, are you all right?" But Tommy wasn't all right. The punch had rattled his brain as well as breaking his teeth. He was having trouble focusing, trouble understanding what had happened. Everything felt dreamlike and unreal. "He hit me," Tommy said, the words barely recognizable through his damaged mouth. "The statue, he hit me." "Yeah, mate, he did," Danny said, putting an arm around Tommy's shoulders to steady him. "We need to get you to a hospital." Pete and their other friend came forward too, looking embarrassed and worried. They had been part of this from the beginning, encouraging Tommy and filming his harassment of the guard. Now they were part of what was clearly going to become a very public humiliation. The crowd was getting bigger as word spread that something dramatic had happened near the palace. People were pulling out phones, not just to record what was happening now, but to call for help. "Someone call an ambulance," shouted an elderly man. "That boy is bleeding badly." "Should we call the police too?" asked his wife. "They're already on their way," said a security guard who had finally arrived on the scene. "We've had multiple calls about a disturbance." Tommy tried to stand up straighter, tried to regain some of his lost dignity. But every movement sent waves of pain through his jaw, and the blood kept flowing from his mouth no matter how much he tried to stop it. "This isn't over," he tried to say to Ryan, but the words came out as a garbled mess. "This isn't over." Ryan remained perfectly still, giving no indication that he had even heard Tommy speak. As far as the guard was concerned, his part in this incident was finished. He had neutralized a threat and returned to his duties. Everything else was someone else's problem. The crowd was buzzing with excited conversation now. People were sharing the videos they had taken, posting them to social media in real time. The hashtags were already starting to form. Hashtag Royal Guard Knockout, hashtag Bully Gets Owned, hashtag Instant Justice. "I can't believe that just happened," said a teenage girl, scrolling through her phone. "This is already going viral. Look, it's been shared like 1,000 times already." Her friend looked over her shoulder at the screen. Oh wow, the comments are brutal. Everyone's calling him an idiot. Tommy was becoming aware that his humiliation was being broadcast to the world in real time. Every phone in the crowd was pointed at him, capturing his bloodied face and missing teeth for posterity. "Stop filming," he tried to say, holding up a shaky hand. "Stop filming me," but it was too late. The damage was done, and not just to his teeth. His reputation, his image as the tough guy who could intimidate anyone, was destroyed as completely. As his smile, the sound of sirens was getting closer now. Both police and ambulance were on their way. Alerted by multiple calls from concerned tourists and security personnel, Tommy looked around at all the faces staring at him, all the phones, recording his moment of ultimate humiliation. These weren't the looks of fear and respect he was used to seeing. These were looks of shock, disgust, and in some cases, satisfaction at seeing a bully get what he deserved. He tried to take a step toward Ryan, perhaps thinking he could somehow salvage the situation with another attack. But his legs were still unsteady, and Danny held him back. "Don't even think about it, mate," Danny said firmly. "You've done enough damage to yourself already." Ryan continued to stand perfectly still, completely unaffected by the chaos around him. He had done his job, protecting himself and maintaining the dignity of his position. The consequences of Tommy's actions were now playing out exactly as they should. As the sirens grew louder and the crowd grew bigger, Tommy began to realize that this moment would follow him for the rest of his life. Every time someone searched his name online, they would find the video of him getting knocked out by a royal guard. Every time he smiled, people would remember that he was the idiot who lost his teeth picking a fight with the wrong person. The taste of blood in his mouth was nothing compared to the bitter taste of complete and utter defeat. The first police officers arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the excited chatter of the crowd. Constable Williams and Constable Shaw pushed through the gathering of tourists, their trained eyes quickly assessing the situation. They saw Tommy sitting on the ground now, blood still dripping from his mouth, while his friends crouched beside him looking worried and embarrassed. They saw the royal guard standing perfectly at attention, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. And they saw dozens of phones still recording everything. "Right then," Constable Williams said, approaching the group. "What's happened here?" Several tourists started talking at once, eager to tell their version of events. The police officers raised their hands for quiet and pointed to an elderly gentleman who seemed calm and reliable. "I saw the whole thing, officer," the man said in a clear voice. "This young man was harassing the guard for quite some time. He was pushing him, trying to knock off his hat, being very disrespectful. Then he threw a punch at the guard, and the guard defended himself." "He didn't defend himself," Tommy tried to protest, but his words were so slurred that he was barely understandable. "He assaulted me." Constable Shaw knelt down next to Tommy, noting the missing teeth and the swelling that was already starting around his jaw. "Sir, we're going to need you to speak slowly and clearly. Can you tell us what happened?" Tommy tried again, frustrated by his inability to speak properly. "I was just talking to him, and he hit me for no reason." But the police officers had already heard enough testimonies from witnesses to know that wasn't true. Multiple people confirmed that Tommy had been the aggressor, that he had harassed the guard for several minutes before throwing the first punch. "We need to see some identification," Constable Williams said to Tommy. "And we'll need statements from your friends as well." Danny reluctantly handed over his phone, which still contained the video of the entire incident. As the police officers watched, their faces grew more serious. "This shows you clearly assaulting the guard," Constable Shaw said to Tommy. "That's a serious offense. Assaulting a member of the armed forces in the performance of their duties carries significant penalties." Tommy's face went pale, which was quite noticeable given how much blood he had lost. "But he hit me back. Look what he did to my teeth." "The guard was acting in self-defense," Constable Williams explained. "You threw the first punch? That makes you the aggressor in this situation." The ambulance arrived while they were talking, and two paramedics quickly took charge of Tommy's medical care. They examined his jaw carefully, checked for signs of concussion, and began the process of stopping the bleeding from his mouth. "We'll need to take him to the hospital," one of the paramedics told the police. "Possible jaw fracture, definitely needs dental work. He'll need surgery to repair this damage." Tommy's friends looked increasingly worried as the severity of the situation became clear. What had started as a bit of fun had turned into a potential criminal case with serious medical consequences. Meanwhile, a sergeant from the military police had arrived to check on Ryan. The Royal Guards fell under military jurisdiction, and any incident involving one of them had to be investigated by the proper authorities. "Are you injured, soldier?" the sergeant asked quietly. "No, sir," Ryan replied, still maintaining his ceremonial posture. "The individual threw a punch, I defended myself, and then resumed my duties." "Good man," the sergeant said. "We'll need a full report, but it sounds like you handled the situation appropriately." The crowd was still growing, and more videos were being uploaded to social media every minute. The hashtags were spreading across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at an incredible rate. Hashtag Royal Guard Knockout was already trending in the UK, and it was starting to spread internationally. As Tommy was loaded into the ambulance, still clutching his bloody mouth, Constable Williams informed him that he would be arrested as soon as his medical treatment was complete. "Arrested?" Tommy mumbled. "For what?" "Assault on a member of the armed forces, disturbing the peace, and likely drunk and disorderly conduct," the officer explained. "You'll be formally charged once you're medically cleared." Tommy's friends were told they would need to come to the station to give statements, since they had been recording and encouraging the incident. Their role as accessories was now being investigated as well. The media had started to arrive. A reporter from the BBC was interviewing witnesses, while photographers captured shots of the blood on the cobblestones and the scattered teeth that still lay where they had fallen. "This is Sarah Jenkins reporting from Buckingham Palace," the BBC reporter said into her microphone, "where a tourist's attempt to harass one of the Queen's guards has ended in dramatic fashion. Ryan continued to stand at his post throughout all of this chaos. His training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation: remain professional, let the authorities handle the aftermath, and continue with his duties. As the ambulance drove away with Tommy inside, the crowd began to disperse. But the videos remained, spreading across the internet at viral speed. The incident that had lasted less than a minute was now being watched by millions of people around the world. Tommy's friends stood around looking lost and embarrassed. The fun day out they had planned had turned into a nightmare. Their mate was on his way to the hospital, possibly facing criminal charges, and they were partially responsible for the whole mess. "We should never have let it go that far," Pete sighed quietly. "He wouldn't have listened anyway," Danny replied. "You know how Tommy gets when he's had a few drinks." But they all knew that excuse wouldn't hold up in court. They had encouraged Tommy, recorded his harassment of the guard, and done nothing to stop him from escalating the situation. The police finished taking statements from witnesses and began the process of filing their reports. This would be a straightforward case. They had video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a clear sequence of events. As the scene finally calmed down, Ryan remained at his post, a symbol of dignity and professionalism. In the face of chaos, he had done his job perfectly, maintaining his ceremonial duties while defending himself when necessary. But for Tommy, the consequences were just beginning. The physical pain was bad enough, but the legal, financial, and social consequences would last much longer than his broken jaw. His moment of drunken aggression was about to cost him everything. By the time Tommy was being wheeled into the emergency room at St. Thomas's Hospital, the video of his humiliation was already exploding across the internet. What had started as a few phone recordings from tourists had become a global phenomenon. In a matter of hours, the Australian tourist who had captured the clearest footage posted it to his TikTok account with the caption, "Bully picks fight with Queen's Guard. Instantly regrets it." Within the first hour, it had 50,000 views. By the second hour, it was approaching 200,000. The algorithm had picked it up. And there was no stopping it now. On Twitter, the hashtag Royal Guard Knockout was trending not just in the UK, but worldwide. People were sharing the video with comments, ranging from shock to satisfaction to outright celebration that a bully had finally gotten what he deserved. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes," read one of the most popular comments, which had been retweeted thousands of times. "That guard showed incredible restraint. Bully was lucky he only lost a few teeth," said another. "Beautiful technique. That's what proper military training looks like," commented someone who claimed to be a former soldier. The video quality was good enough that Tommy's face was clearly visible throughout the entire incident. His name and address were discovered within hours by internet users who treated tracking down viral video subjects like a competitive sport. Facebook groups dedicated to instant justice and bullies getting owned shared the video repeatedly. Each share brought more comments, more reactions, and more humiliation for Tommy, but it was TikTok where Tommy's humiliation really took off. The platform's younger users had turned his downfall into a meme factory. They created remix videos set to music, added sound effects to the moment of impact, and made compilation videos, comparing his arrogant swagger before the punch to his pathetic state afterward. One particularly cruel TikTok user had isolated the audio of Tommy trying to speak with his missing teeth, turning his slurred attempts at words into a viral sound bite that thousands of other users incorporated into their own videos. "Fifth Even Over" became an instant meme, with people using the audio clip over videos of other people getting their comeuppance. YouTube compilation channels picked up the story within hours. Instant Karma compilation number 47, "Bully Gets Destroyed" by Royal Guard, received 500,000 views on its first day alone. The comment sections were brutal. Thousands of people shared their own stories of dealing with bullies, expressing satisfaction that Tommy had finally met someone who wouldn't back down. "I wish someone had done this to my school bully," wrote one user. "This is what happens when you mess with the wrong person," said another. "Hope his teeth grow back crooked," added a particularly vindictive commenter. Local London newspapers picked up the story by evening. The Daily Mail ran with the headline, "Bully Bites Off More Than He Can Chew. Drunk Yob Loses Teeth After Attacking Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace." The article included screenshots from the viral video, quotes from witnesses, and even tracked down Tommy's employment information. They revealed that he worked for a construction company in East London, adding another layer of real-world consequences to his online humiliation. Tommy's employer, Morrison Construction Limited, became aware of the situation when their office started receiving phone calls from reporters asking for comment. The company's receptionist was confused at first, but as more calls came in, the management team realized they had a serious public relations problem on their hands. The company's owner, Robert Morrison, watched the viral video with growing horror. Not only was his employees' behavior embarrassing and illegal, but Tommy was wearing a Morrison Construction hoodie in the footage, clearly identifying him as one of their workers. "Get him in here first thing Monday morning," Morrison told his office manager. "Actually, no. Call him now and tell him not to bother coming in anymore. We can't have someone like that representing our company." But Tommy wasn't answering his phone. He was still in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness due to the pain medication they had given him for his broken jaw. The story spread to international news outlets by Sunday evening. CNN, BBC World Service, and even news channels in Australia and Japan ran segments about the Royal Guard knockout that had captured the world's attention. Each news report brought the story to new audiences, creating fresh waves of viral sharing and commenting. The incident was being discussed in living rooms, offices, and classrooms around the world. Tommy's neighbors began recognizing him from the video. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door to his flat, was shocked when she realized the bloodied man in the viral video was the same person who had lived next to her for 3 years. "I always knew he was trouble," she told a reporter who had tracked down his address. "Always making noise, having loud parties, but I never thought he'd do something this stupid." The local pub where Tommy and his friends had been drinking before The incident also found itself in the spotlight. The Crown's landlord was interviewed by multiple news outlets, forced to defend his establishment's reputation. "We serve alcohol responsibly," he insisted. "What people do after they leave is not our responsibility." But the damage was done. The pub's online reviews were flooded with negative comments from people who had seen the viral video, Tommy's social. Media accounts became targets for thousands of angry comments. His Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter profiles were bombarded with messages calling him everything from pathetic to much worse insults. People shared screenshots of his posts, analyzing his past behavior for signs of the aggression he had displayed at Buckingham Palace. His gym selfies and tough guy poses were reposted with mocking comments about how his muscles hadn't helped him against a trained soldier. Dating apps where Tommy had profiles also became venues for his humiliation. Screenshots of his profiles circulated on social media with women sharing warnings about avoiding him. "Swipe left on this guy" became a popular caption. Accompanying his dating photos, the psychological impact of this level of public humiliation was enormous. Tommy had gone from being a local tough guy to being internationally known as the idiot who got knocked out by a royal guard. Every laugh, every comment, every share of the video added to a growing mountain of shame that would follow him for years to come, and this was only the beginning. The legal consequences, the medical bills, and the long-term career impact were still to come. Tommy had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of bullying in the age of social media, where one moment of poor judgment could destroy a person's entire life in a matter of hours. 6 months later, Tommy sat in the waiting room of an expensive dental clinic in Harley Street, nervously fidgeting with the appointment letter in his hands. The pristine white walls and soft classical music couldn't calm his anxiety about what this visit was going to cost him. The dental work alone had already set him back £15,000, and he still wasn't finished. The punch had done more damage than anyone initially realized. His jaw had been fractured in 2 places, requiring surgery to insert metal plates. 3 of his front teeth had been completely knocked out. 2 others were so badly damaged they had to be removed, and several more needed expensive crowns. "Mr. Thompson?" called the receptionist, her voice professionally polite but cool. Even here, in one of London's most exclusive dental practices, people recognized him. The viral video had made his face famous in all the wrong ways. As he walked into the dentist's office, Tommy caught sight of himself in a mirror and winced. 6 months of healing had helped, but he still didn't look like the confident man who had swaggered up to that royal guard. The temporary dental work gave him a strange, unnatural smile, and the scar on his jawline would be permanent. "How are we feeling today?" asked Dr. Reynolds, examining Tommy's mouth with professional detachment. She had seen the viral video too, of course, everyone had. "Still hurts sometimes," Tommy mumbled, his speech still slightly affected by all the dental work, especially when it's cold. "That's normal," Dr. Reynolds said, making notes on his chart. "The permanent implants should help with that. But I have to warn you, this final procedure is going to be quite expensive." Tommy already knew. Another £8,000 for the permanent implants, plus ongoing maintenance costs for the rest of his life. All because of one moment of drunken stupidity. The financial cost was devastating, but it wasn't even the worst part of what had happened to him. The criminal charges had been the next blow. Assault on a member of the armed forces was taken very seriously by the British legal system. Despite his lawyer's attempts to argue for leniency based on his intoxication, the judge had been unsympathetic. "This was an unprovoked attack on a serviceman performing his duty," Judge Harrison had said during sentencing. "The fact that it was filmed and witnessed by dozens of people, including children, makes it even more serious." Tommy received a 6-month suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. The community service meant spending his weekends picking up litter and cleaning graffiti instead of relaxing or socializing, but the legal consequences were nothing compared to what had happened to his career. Morrison Construction had fired him. Immediately, of course. The viral video showing their employee harassing a royal guard while wearing company clothing had been a public relations nightmare. They couldn't afford to keep him on, regardless of his previous work record. Finding new employment with a criminal record and international notoriety proved nearly impossible. Every potential employer seemed to recognize him from the video. Even when they didn't immediately recognize his face, a simple Google search of his name brought up hundreds of articles and videos about the incident. "We'll be in touch," became the standard response after every job interview. Followed by silence, Tommy had been forced to take work through a temp agency, doing day labor for cash. The pay was terrible, the work was inconsistent, and there were no benefits. His standard of living had plummeted. He'd had to move out of his flat and back in with his mother, a humiliation that felt almost as bad as the viral video itself. At 28 years old, he was sleeping in his childhood bedroom while his mother lectured him about his behavior every day. "I raised you better than this," she would say, shaking her head in disappointment. "How could you embarrass yourself and our family like that?" The social consequences were perhaps the hardest to bear. His friends had initially stood by him, but as the viral fame turned toxic, they began to distance themselves. Being associated with Tommy meant being associated with his humiliation. Danny had stopped returning his calls after his own employer had seen him in the background of some news reports about the incident. Pete had moved to another part of London and changed his phone number. The group that had once looked up to Tommy as their leader had completely disbanded. Dating had become impossible. Every woman he approached either recognized him immediately or found out about the viral video within days of meeting him. His dating app profiles were useless. Too many people knew his face from the internet. "You're that guy, aren't you?" had become the most common reaction when he tried to meet someone new. The one who got knocked out by the guard? The psychological impact was enormous. Tommy had always defined himself by his physical toughness and his ability to intimidate others. The viral video had destroyed that identity completely. Now, instead of people being afraid of him, they laughed at him. He had developed anxiety about being in public places. Every time someone looked at him twice or whispered to their friend, he wondered if they had recognized him from the video. The paranoia was constant and exhausting. The incident had also forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. During his community service, working alongside other people who had made poor choices, he began to realize how his behavior had affected others throughout his life. "I used to be just like you," said another community service volunteer, an older man named Robert who was there for a drunk driving conviction. "Thought being tough made me important. Took me years to realize I was just a bully." The conversation had hit Tommy harder than the Royal Guard's punch. For the first time, he began to understand that his reputation as a tough guy had really been a reputation as someone who picked on people weaker than himself. Ryan Clark, the Royal Guard who had defended himself so effectively, had become something of a folk hero. He had received commendations from his superiors and praise from military organizations around the world. A video interview with him had gone viral in its own right, showing an articulate, professional soldier who had handled a difficult situation with perfect restraint. "I take no pleasure in what happened," Ryan had said in the interview. "I was simply doing my job and defending myself when necessary. I hope the individual has learned from this experience and can move forward in a positive way." The grace and professionalism Ryan displayed in that interview only made Tommy's behavior look worse by comparison. Now, sitting in the dental clinic waiting for another expensive procedure, Tommy reflected on how completely his life had changed. The confident, feared man who had approached that Royal Guard no longer existed. In his place was someone who had learned, through the most painful and public way possible, that actions have consequences. The viral video would never go away. It would follow him for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder of the worst decision he had ever made. But perhaps, Tommy thought as he was called in for his appointment, he could find a way to build something better from the ruins of his old life. The lesson had been brutal, but it had been learned. The age of social media meant that one moment of poor judgment could destroy everything you had built. But it also meant that redemption, if it came, would have to be earned through years of better choices and genuine change. Tommy's story had become a cautionary tale that parents showed their children, that self-defense instructors used in their classes, and that military personnel shared as an example of why discipline and training mattered. He would never be the same person who had swaggered up to that Royal Guard 6 months ago. And maybe Tommy was beginning to think that was actually a good thing.